Hey folks, welcome back to NC State Dendrology. I'm coming to you today from Umstead State Park, one of the state parks in the central part of North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh. So we're here today to talk about, actually this is the week that I call the Oakalicious Lab. We will learn 8 species of oaks this week in lab, and rather than thinking about that as cruel and unusual punishment, it's a real opportunity to get to know these oaks that are side by side, which makes them much easier to compare and learn the differences among them. And I think that the VLPI tool is also going to help you do those quick comparisons and practice, and so you'll really get an eye for the differences among these oaks. The southeastern United States is not the center of oak diversity, but it does have a lot of oaks, and I think we'll learn probably a dozen or more species of oaks in lab this semester. So I'm excited today to introduce you to Quercus marilandica, or Blackjack oak. So Blackjack being one word, it's in the Fagaceae, the oak family, and the genus is Quercus, which we're going to focus on this week. So at the end of this week, you're really going to know the Quercus genus pretty well and know that it's in the Fagaceae. So Quercus marilandica is a species that's not super common to find around the triangle. It prefers dry, rocky soils, and so I'm here at probably the highest point in Umstead State Park, looking around to see what else is in the understory. There's quite a bit of chestnut oak, Quercus montana, that we'll also learn today. There's shortleaf pine and also post oak. And so these are oaks that can tolerate dry, rocky, and sometimes sandy soils. They don't need deep soils, they don't need super rich soils. And just to tell you a little bit about the bark for Quercus marilandica, you can see it's got the yellow sign on it behind me marking the property boundary for the park. And this is one of our red oaks that does not have ski trails, right? So it's got this dark cobbled bark. The bark is a little bit extra dark today because it's been raining. And then the form is also really important for Quercus marilandica. So if I angle the camera up above my head, you can see that Blackjack oak has a form that I would call, not a technical term, but scraggly, right? So this is an understory tree, lots of branching, lots of lower branches that it retains. And so you might look at this oak and it's probably pretty easy to guess that this is not an oak that has a high wood value. But one really interesting thing about Quercus marilandica is that it does have tight tyloses. It's the only red oak that has tyloses, and so it has tight cooperage. So you could use this species for barrel making. Mostly though, it's, you know, if it's a secondary tree that might be harvested as part of a cut, could be used for pallet making or railroad ties, but it tends to have lots of knots because of all this branching. Blackjack oak is in the red oak group, and so let's look at some features to identify it. So I love the leaves for Blackjack oak. They're very distinctive. So this is not a species you're going to see very often, but when you do see it, it's pretty easy to identify. So how would you describe these leaves? So notice that they're dark and shiny on the outside, and then they're on the underside they're light green, not super light green. Here's one that's not, kind of a little bit different than the others, right? So the leaves are what I would call, right? So here's the top of the leaf up here. Here's the base of the leaf. I would term these obdeltoid leaves, right? So they're triangular, but the widest part is towards the tip, and then they taper down to the base. So obdeltate leaves, and so here's one that's got a flat or truncate leaf tip, but sometimes you'll see examples of Blackjack oak that are a little bit narrower, right? So here's some variation in these leaves. This one has sort of 3 very shallow lobes on it. Now this is a red oak, so these leaves are supposed to have bristle tips on them, but I've looked at a whole bunch of leaves on this particular tree and it doesn't seem to have bristle tips at all. So there you have it. Trees are weird, right? Leaves are weird and they differ depending on where you are in the tree, right? So these are at the edge, so they're a little bit sun, a little bit shade leaves. These are pretty typical leaves. And I want to show you, remember that red oaks have acorns that take 2 seasons to develop. So I'm going to show you this since I saw it. So on this branch you can see, right, I just knocked them off. So that tree is not going to have those acorns for next fall. But those baby acorns are developing acorns. Shoot, I'm going to have to find another branch. Okay, I'm going to be more careful this time. Let me turn the branch. Okay, so these are the developing acorns on the branch, right? So they'll be 1 year old this year, and then next year they'll be 2 years old, and that's when they'll drop off. So 2 seasons to develop. Sorry about that. And you can see that again here on this acorn, right? So these acorns are distinctive. So here you can see the baby or developing acorn here. This fell off the tree. And then here is an adult acorn. So this will fall off this fall. So this is an almost fully developed acorn. And so you can see it's not the smallest acorn of our oak trees, but it's also not very large. I would say it's medium sized. And if you look at the acorn cap, it might develop a little bit more. The nut may be developing just a little bit more, but the acorn cap covers about 2/3 of the nut, and it has the typical kind of shingle scales that are typical for red oaks. The other thing that is important to observe for these acorns is that they have kind of a turban-shaped acorn cap. So they're not flat across the top. They're pointy at the top, and then they flare out, almost like a Hershey Kiss. And so sort of a turban-shaped top, that's very distinctive and a good way to know Quercus marilandica. This one is pretty orangey, but I think they dry out to a more typical dark brown color. And you can see there are overlapping scales that are a little bit fuzzy. And then I'll show you, this is one that I found on the ground that again illustrates that taper, right? So you can see that it's pointy at the top and then flares out right into a triangular or turban shape. So that's Blackjack oak, Quercus marilandica.